G'day, we're here outside Yass in central New South Wales near Canberra, and behind me you can see a cottage, and it's called Hume Cottage. It belonged to Australia's first native-born explorer called Hamilton Hume, and you've heard his name many times because Hume Highway and all. And in Yass here we're going to find out more of his story, but this was his home. This is where he passed away in 1875. We're here on the Yass River. Hamilton Hume's got a very interesting family background. His dad was son of a Scottish preacher who escaped the troubles in Scotland because there was religious persecution. He took his Presbyterian church across to Ireland. Andrew grew up in Ireland. This is in the 1700s, early 1700s, and he was a feisty lad, I suppose, being a Scotsman in Ireland and a Presbyterian as well, and went to the military. Ended up having a duel with his senior officer, shot him, and was obviously cashiered out of the army. But he was driving hard. He was a hard driving sort of man, and eventually got a contract to come to the colony of New South Wales in the 1790s. Soon after it was settled, to work under Governor Phillip. His boat sank on the way out here, so he was rescued, managed to get the boat to, well, didn't quite sink, but they got it here. And he started off at Norfolk Island and came back to Sydney town, and that's where he met his wife. But he was always a troublesome sort of man. He's always seemed to be argumentative, driven, not always popular. So when he married Elizabeth, he was apparently a very quiet, well-educated girl. Came out here with her brother to be a governess for his children. She was quickly appointed the matron or the supervisor of the girls' orphanage in Sydney. And she obviously had she had a religious background too. Came from a home of a reverend in the Anglican church. So she brought her faith with her too. So the two of them had religious backgrounds. Andrew feisty, Elizabeth quiet and well educated, and they soon moved out to Toongabbie where they were given land, and he was managing some convicts out there. But the interesting thing about them was, I think Andrew lent his adventurous spirit to his sons. Elizabeth brought education and a Christian spirit to that family, I'm pretty sure. She taught her sons to be caring for the Aboriginal people and for the convicts. And they were considered sort of outsiders on colonial society, if you like, the English part of colonial society, partly because they befriended the Aboriginal people, partly because they were looking after the convicts. And Andrew really hated the convict system anyway and spoke out against it. And I think because their children were currency kids, they were born here, so they found themselves a little bit on the fringe. But I think even though there was a mixed sort of spirit in the family, and Andrew's feistiness and Elizabeth's steadiness, she was the one that sort of steered the family through. So I've been following Hamilton Hume's life through, and the input of his mum and his dad. But there was another strain to his education, which wasn't anything to do with formal education, even though it seemed like there was something strong there, because later in life he had a great library in the cottage up here at Hume Cottage. But he learned a great deal in the bush. He lived, as I said, on the fringe of Sydney. He quickly befriended Aboriginal children, Aboriginal people, learned to speak the language, learned to hunt, learned their tracking skills, lived in the bush with his brothers, and developed amazing skills that were second to none in terms of tracking and scouting and exploration. So at 16 years old, he took his 14-year-old brother away from Appin on the southern edge of Sydney all the way down to Berrima on the southern highlands. They went off on their own with an Aboriginal lad, got all the way there, away for a few weeks, came back. So that was his first major exploration, and then it went from there as his skills grew. He quickly became this sort of sought-after tracker. Now, he wasn't always employed by the government. He was sort of this freelance, if you like, type of tracker. And I suppose in a way he was sort of like the Daniel Boone or Kit Carson they have in America. he's our version of that. He was brilliant in the bush. Everybody said he was matchless in his skills at being able to read the land, look for good land, find his way in difficult circumstances, and relate to the Aboriginal people. And as I read his story, I thought, boy, if more of the early settlers had had that range of skills, the ability to get on with the Aboriginal people and understand them, what a difference it might have made. So he was quickly employed by people like the governors, and then he went out with Oxley and Sturt and did major explorations, and gained a reputation as sort of the #1 tracker, if you like, in the colony. But one of his greatest skills, I think, was his ability to relate to the Aboriginal people. And oddly enough, one of the great instances we know of, because he didn't write down very much, and he didn't journal things, and he never led expeditions as in he was the main man. He was always 2IC, if you like. He was second fiddle to Sturt or Oxley or somebody else. But Sturt recorded when they went looking for the inland sea up towards Burke, where I lived. Hume was his #1 man, and he got that expedition out of some very deep trouble. It was drought time, they were short of water. He was the one that found animals, he was the one that found water for them, and when they got to the Darling River, it was too salty to drink. They actually caught it in the Salt River, and it was Hume that rescued them by watching the animals, watching the birds, and finding where they were finding water, and he saved the expedition just by his sheer skills. But in particular, when the Aboriginal people, who were shocked and surprised to see these white men on horses and all, and seemed aggressive or trying to resist them or send them away, it was Hume, on one particular occasion, he and Sturt were being approached by quite a big group of hostile natives with spears and so on, who were threatening them. Sturt says it was Hume's skills in sitting down, first of all, and so the natives sat down. Then he pulled a branch off a tree and threw it on the ground, and they pulled a branch off a tree, which is a symbol of peace. They were able to communicate. And Sturt said he learned a lot from being with Hamilton Hume, and his natural ability to not only read the land, but also to make peace with the Aboriginal people, which he seemed to be able to do all his life, and he could speak languages and communicate. So he was an exceptional man, and of course he led that's a big argument between he and Hovell about leading the expedition down to Port Phillip Bay, but that became an argument later in life, sadly, but that was their big name exploration. But after he'd done that, he came back and settled in this district here around Yass, over at Cooma Cottage, and became a citizen of this town, and built the church up the road here, helped build it, and become a foundation member, magistrate in the area, and highly respected. So when you sum this guy's life up, in those early days, living on the fringe, currency kid, on the edge of society, and yet earning his own way, there's a stamp about him that you've got to like. It says, yeah, he was an authentically new style of Australian, if you like, that came here with the settlers, learned from the Aboriginals, and carved out great tracts of land. I think he's credited with finding more productive land almost than anybody else in those days. So his health broke on that trip up to Burke, that Burke district, and he never really went exploring much after that in the 1820s, late 1820s. But he did live to 75, became a landholder in this area, quite successful, no children, 40 nephews and nieces whom he looked after. So when you sum his life up, you say, well, yeah, he really gave a lot to this country, and he should be somebody that probably got more notoriety than he actually got in his time, but certainly someone that any young Australian looking for a hero, I reckon Hamilton Hume would be one of those that they could look to. We're here at the Anglican Church in Yass, and I'm always interested to see what sort of faith background some of these key people in our history had. And just looking around, I've discovered a few things. One, I mentioned earlier that his grandfathers were both ministers, one Presbyterian, one Anglican, on both sides of the family. And even when he was young, he started corresponding with his grandfather, Presbyterian grandfather over in Scotland. Well, he was in Scotland, came to Ireland. And then he had a cousin in Scotland, Abraham Hume, Reverend Abraham Hume, and he remained in correspondence with him all his life. So I guess Hamilton grew up without opportunity to go to church as such, because he was always on the fringe. He was out on the fringe at Toongabbie and then Yass, and earlier on in Appin, and then travelling. So there was no chance for him to become a regular churchgoer, but interestingly he became a trustee and a founding member of this Anglican church here, which says to me that his mother's faith in particular, Elizabeth's faith, was strong in his heart, and it seems to have set the calibre in his life. So why you might put a stamp Anglican on him or whatever, but it seems to me that in his heart of hearts there was a strong Christian upbringing and set of values and faith. So here we are in the precincts, and from here his funeral went. They said there was about 30-40 wagons and coaches, 100 horsemen followed him up the hill there we were. We'll go in a moment to have a look at the graveyard to lay Australia's great explorer to rest. Well, here we are in the beautiful Yass Valley, and here's Hamilton Hume's grave, looking across that lovely scene, that the land that he sort of discovered, if you like, as a white explorer. And all he's got on his grave is simply an Australian explorer. He died at 76 in 1873. I like what he said. He had a little statement there on the bottom that says, "For the sake of those who bear my name, I should wish it to be held in remembrance as that of one who, with small opportunities but limited resources, did what he could for his native land." That's nice, isn't it? Hamilton Hume, a statement of facts in 1873. Well, it's the last resting place of Australia's great scout, great explorer, Hamilton Hume, the currency lad that made a name. Oh, I like him.